Others stand for the reading of the gospel. John chapter 1, starting in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children, not born of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.'" Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated.
Hello, everyone. We are going to dive into the Gospel of John this evening. We're going to have a look at that because it's winter and it's dark. I'm glad now it's dark in the evening. When I did this message this morning, it wasn't dark, so it was different. But now that it's dark, it's important to look at the first chapter of John because it talks about light. And as we look at this light, I hope that I will be able to enlighten you. Cue the laughter of John. He laughed at that joke earlier today. I hope I will be able to enlighten you as to the meaning of the first chapter of the Gospel of John. Okay. In verses 1 to 4, we are going to see a claim. This is a 3-part message, as all true messages should be. Number 1, the claim. 2, the problem with the claim, or how the claim is rejected. And number 3, we're going to look at an answer to the objections made to the claim that John is making at the very beginning. So claim, rejection, and an answer to those objections. Are we ready? Okay, here we go. Verses 1 to 4. In verses 1 to 4, we have the Word of God. And the Word is described, we learn 4 things about the Word. The first thing that we learn about the Word is that the Word is a person. You can see there, right there in verse 2, he was with God in the beginning. He is a person. That's the word, a person. Number two, the word is divine. Now, here in our chapter, it tells us that the word was with God and the word was God. Now, some people have said, hang on a second, with God, was God? Is that really divine? Maybe he's just a little divine. Maybe he's just like Spider-Man and he was a person and he got like bitten by a divine spider. No. The way that we know that the Word of God is absolutely divine is because it tells us after that through him all things were made, without him nothing was made that had been made. What does that mean? It means that everything that had a beginning began with him, right? He is the uncreated creator of all things. Therefore, the Gospel of John is clearly saying, no, the Word is divine. Because if it had a beginning, he begun it. Right, good. Number three, the Word is life, right? Now, we could creep in a fifth one and say, the life is the light of man, and say that the Word is life and the Word is light. But I'm just going to be conservative and stick with the Word is life. And then fourth one, we see in verse 14, the Word became flesh. Now, as we think about all that this chapter is saying about the Word, we have to ask ourselves, why did John choose to say it this way? And he chose to say it this way because of the word that he used for the Word, which was logos. Some of you may know this, that the word in Greek used for the word is logos. And the reason that John used this is because, and I think, he was creating essentially an earthquake in the world of thought, in the ancient world. An earthquake that is still shaking the way people think to this very day. And I want us to kind of see that and experience that by, first of all, understanding a little bit about what the word logos meant. In the ancient world, the Greeks looked out at the world and they saw harmony. They saw balance. And by seeing this harmony and balance, the Greeks, being wise as they were, said, there's got to be a reason for this. There is something that lies behind the balance and the harmony of this world that is essentially making it work. Right? Today, somebody may have said, there's an algorithm, right, sitting at the back, behind everything, making all of this work. Well, back then, they called this the logos. Right? Now, the best way of describing it I've got a proper way of saying it here. It is an impersonal, cosmic, spiritual principle. Impersonal, cosmic, spiritual principle. That is the proper way of describing what the Greeks saw when they saw the logos. But of course, they're human beings, and so everyone disagreed as to what the logos actually was, what that logic behind the world is. And of course, the implication is that if there is this logic, we want to align ourselves with it, right? We want to connect to it, and that way we'll be connected to the way that things are supposed to be. Now, different people had different ideas of what that logos would be. The Stoics, for example, believed that the logos meant that everything that happened for a reason. And because everything is happening for a reason, we must be ready to take whatever the world gives, right? Whatever happens in this world, we have to deal with it. It's supposed to happen to us. So you've got to be, now in English, the Stoic, right? We actually just took that idea and made it into an adjective in the English language. But it essentially means you have to be strong. Yeah? You have to be strong, you have to be focused, you have to have a plan, you have to know what's it all about, because if you don't, life's going to hit you and you're going to get knocked down. And that's not what's supposed to happen. The logos is to be strong, to be ready, whatever comes my way, I'm ready to take it on. That's the Stoics. Now, there was another group that I think might be more appealing to today's culture, and they were called the Epicureans. Right? Now, the Epicureans were, what is the logos? What is the purpose of life? For you to be happy. Right? The purpose of life is for you to be happy. So find your own truth and live that out. And whatever makes you happy, whatever makes you smile in the morning, that's good. That's what life's about. And the Epicureans believed that, lived it out, and that was their logos. That's how they were connecting to the world. They were like, what's the world here for? To make me happy. And if I'm happy, whoo, that's awesome. Okay. Now, John 1 enters this world where you've got Epicureans, Stoics, and everything in between. Yeah? And he shows up and he says, no. He says that the Logos is not an impersonal cosmic principle. He shows up and he says, no, the Logos is a person. It's not a principle to be lived up to. It is a person to know and to love. And that blew it out of the water. Nobody knew what to do. Right? It changed everything. It changed things so much that historians writing about it today describe this change, as something that drove the Greeks mad. Right? So here I've got a book called A Brief History of Thought. Anyone seen that book, read that book? No, it might be a bit of an oldish book for some of us. A Brief History of Thought. It's a wonderfully sort of regular, easy to read book on the history of thought. It's written by a Frenchman, so that's a downside for that. I have to do it. I'm an Englishman. I'm going to poke at the French. But this Frenchman, Luc Ferry, by the way, a guy who was so renowned for his understanding of sort of philosophy and thought, became the Minister of Education in France after he wrote this book. But Luc Ferry, writing about this, says this. He says that the Logos was an impersonal, harmonious, divine structure of the cosmos. But to the horror of the Greeks, he writes, the Christians maintained that the Logos, in other words, the divine principle, was not the harmonious order of the world, but was incarnated in one outstanding individual, namely Christ. By resting its case upon a definition of the human person and an unprecedented idea of love, Christianity was to have an incalculable effect upon the history of ideas. To give one example, it is quite clear that without the Christian reevaluation of the human person, the philosophy of human rights to which we subscribe today would never have established itself. What he is recognizing is that if John had not come along, I don't want to go off on this tangent too far, but if John had not come along and said that this principle is not in fact a principle, but in fact a person that we see in Jesus, changing the way that we look not only at God, but also at man, our understanding of human rights would have been completely different. We may have even maintained the ideas of human rights that the Greeks had, which was too terrible to mention in polite company. So John's point, first of all, and his claim, is that the Logos, the algorithm, the thing that we're trying to connect with, that sits behind all of reality and truth, is not a principle. It's not a thing that you just have to understand, connect to, and then try to live up to. What he's saying is it's not that. Rather, it is a person that you can get to know. And which means, by the way, that it's not just the smart people that will get it. It's not just the awesome people or the strong people or the stoic people that will be able to understand or connect with the reality of everything. But it's anyone that can do it. Anyone can connect. Why? Because anyone can get to know another person. And anyone can love a person. It means that people who aren't smart, or people who don't understand, or people who struggle with, sitting down and listening to long talks, can understand God because they can get to know Jesus in their way, because he is a person and not a principle. So that's the claim. That's what is being put out there by John chapter 1. Now it gets rejected. And as you all know, this has been widely rejected for many, many years. It tells us even in the passage that he came to those who were his own and they did not receive him. They pushed him back. Now, in verse 5, we read this. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, if you have a Bible in front of you, you will normally have either a letter or a number right next to the word overcome. That's if you're using the NIV, the nearly inspired version. The NIV, if you're using that, you'll see that there's a mark there. In fact, in every translation, there will be a mark next to the word overcome. If you're using the King James, it will say, comprehendeth it not. Yeah? And there'll be a mark there as well, because it's a very difficult word to translate, because it's one of these words that has a very wide semantic range. It includes both the idea of overcoming, beating, defeating, but on the other hand, it also includes the idea of understanding or comprehending. The word in Greek is kateleban. Now, in English, we actually have a word that has the same semantic range. Phew. Help to the preacher here. And the word is master, to master. If I am going to master something, I can both master it by beating it, by defeating it, but I can also master something by completely and properly understanding it. And I think that these are the two ways this semantic range of this word is chosen by John, because these are the two ways that I think people tend to counter or reject that which is our understanding of the Logos. The first is a hostile way, all right, an outright rejection. And the second is a rejection by not really getting it, not really understanding it. So the first one, the hostile way, the complete rejection. This is to say, there is no Logos, right? I reject this idea of a Logos, reject this idea of absolute truth, forget it, useless, throw it out. And there are many people like that in the world today. However, if you were to observe people of that ilk or that tendency in the world today, you will notice there are some things, and sociologists have looked into this as well, mainly in the United States. They've looked into this, and you'll notice there's a couple of things that are true about people that tend to be relativists. One is that they actually still do have very strong moral feelings. Right? They tend to have very strong moral feelings about injustice, for example, the treatment of the poor. These things are wrong, these things to be solved, and they do tend to have strong moral issues about this. But at the same time, they will also be relativists. And now, their relativism, I think we encounter in two main ways. Firstly, they are culturally relative and person-specific. Now, what do I mean by that? Culturally relative. It means that the Jewish people can't tell the Arab people over here how they're supposed to live, right? You've got your morality, they've got their morality, you leave them alone, you leave them alone. Culturally relative. Every culture can choose for themselves. But at the same time, they're also person-specific, which means, bro, I can do what I think is right, you can do what you think is right. We don't have to agree on what is right and wrong all the time. You do you, I do me. We're good. So there is a person-specific and culturally relative feeling about it. The other third thing that sociologists have discovered is that this sort of person tends to believe that morality is self-evident. Right? That, how do I know it's right? Because, it's obvious. It's like what, it's obvious. That is the way that most of the people that tend to reject the idea of an absolute truth will go. Now, the studies obviously come up with problems, right? The first issue is the incoherence of the idea that morality can be self-evident. Yeah? Forget about looking throughout history, but just looking at the gamut of ways that people look at morality today, there is nothing self-evident about morality, right? Absolutely everybody disagrees with everyone, yeah? So morality is not self-evident. And the other issue is going to be trying to get point 1 and point 2 to agree with each other. For example, if you do have strong moral feelings about how things are happening, it's very difficult to be culturally relative. One of the researchers proved this by showing that he went to one particular person and said, well, hey, in this country over here, they don't let women drive. Women are not allowed to drive in that country. And he's like, okay, that's their country. What are you going to do? And it's just like, but he said, but do you think women should not be allowed to drive? No, that's absolutely wrong. Women should be allowed to drive. So should we go over there and tell them? Silence, right? Obviously not. Yeah, it's inconsistent, right? So incoherent and inconsistent to be able to actually be a moral relativist and to find some kind of direction. And so, with relativism falling apart before our eyes, yeah, what's our other option? Well, I hear you say, moralism. Yeah? No, right? Moralism too, completely out according to this Gospel of John. But it's an objection. People say, and I think this is the one where it's not that they're hostile, but moralism is where people just don't get it. Because moralism is returning to the idea that the Logos is a principle, that it's a thing, it's a law. And the issue with moralism is that the minute you have a law, the first thing that's going to happen is that you are going to find yourself oppressed, right? The law that you have set up, whatever it is that you're going to set up as the thing, is going to show up and crash upon you. It's going to be very difficult. And many of you in this room may discover it very soon, because on January the 1st, you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to say, ha, 2025, I shall conquer you. And how shall I do it? I shall do this, this, and this. And you'll set up these principles by which you will live your 2025. But by January 10th, you will be there at the edge of your bed, half a bottle of wine already over, yeah, saying to yourself, woe is me, another 2024 is about to happen, right? You will crash because you won't be able to live up to it. And then you will feel yourself oppressed by these very principles you're trying to live up to. Or, and this is where it gets really bad, you live up to those principles. And then you start looking at everyone else around you as less than you. And you are not oppressed, but rather you become the oppressor. Moralism doesn't work because it submits us to a world of a bunch of rules that take us down, or rules that we live up to and then take everyone else down with. And so moralism doesn't work. It also, by the way, for many of us who enter Christianity and try to engage it as moralists, this is the prime way in which somebody can sit in a church pew their entire life and still not get it. Because you can't look to Jesus and be a moralist. Back in the days of Jesus, there were a ton of moralists, and they all were looking at Jesus, that is, the Orthodox Jews, something that I used to be. They would look at Jesus and they would say, he teaches God's word, he does miracles, he's awesome, but at the same hand, look at the people he hangs out with, right? He hangs out with prostitutes, he hangs out with tax collectors, he hangs out with all sorts of crazy people. This guy could not possibly be true, which is why the main group of people sending Jesus to the cross were moralists, right? It wasn't the terrible people who rejected absolute truth. No, they couldn't care less. The people sending Jesus to the cross were moralists. So we don't have relativism, and moralism hasn't saved us from the ambiguity and incoherence of relativism. So what do we have left? Well, the gospel. And that's the answer. And I'm going to read it to you, because it's here in John chapter 1, verses 12 to 14. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The way out is by becoming a child of God. Now, here in this passage, it tells us that to be God's child is a gift. Now, for some of us, even for anyone who might read the Bible, hang on a second, aren't we all God's children? Paul, in fact, in the book of Acts, he goes and speaking to the Greeks says, we're all children of God, right? We're all God's children. So what is he talking about here that it's a gift? It's because there's a difference between being a child of God in the fact that we are part of creation and being adopted into his family. The relationship changes. I'm not just part of creation, but I've been adopted. I've become part of the plan, the thing, what's happening, I'm connecting to the Logos in a different way. I'm not just here, right? It's like my gamer mind wants to say, I've stopped being an NPC and I've joined the player characters, right? I'm actually engaging the game. And that relationship, well, it's difficult to define, but as kids, okay, for example, like this. If you're an employee and you're working at a place, right? Your employer is going to engage with you, but as you begin to misbehave, as you begin to mess up, he's going to have to start asking himself questions, right? There are cost-benefit questions. There is performance questions. And if you cross a certain line, if you're costing the company more than you're giving to the company, then he's going to have to just let you go, right? You're just out. But once you're part of the family, when you're a dad, as I am, and one of your kids starts messing up, do you know what happens? You don't just go, okay, kid causing problems, get him a suitcase, get him out. No. What do? Your love actually intensifies the minute your kid is messing around, right? All of a sudden, other people, even in the family, take a back seat and you start focusing in on the kid and you're just like, hang on a second, I've got to talk, we've got to engage, we've got to understand what's going on, how do we help? Your love intensifies because your relationship is not based on transaction and what do I get? Moralism, right? Your relationship is based on an unconditional love, on a covenant, on something that is beyond what anything my child could possibly do. That's what's there for. If you were to try and go and meet Bibi Netanyahu, right? Not that I want to meet Bibi Netanyahu, but if you were going to try and talk to Bibi, right? If you went in there without an appointment, right, you wouldn't get far. If you tried to rush at Bibi without an appointment, you would probably get shot, right? In fact, even if you had an appointment, if you tried to rush at him, you would probably get shot. But if Bibi's kids show up, or if his grandkids show up, they can run, they can jump, they can do whatever they want. What the Bible is saying, its answer, is that this kind of relationship with God is offered as a gift. The Bible's response to the rejection of relativism and the misunderstanding of moralism is that this relationship with God is a gift. It's something you just get to walk into. And in the ancient world, and John describes this with this one word. So I had a Greek word at the beginning, logos. Then we had kataleben, right, the overcoming understanding. And then there's one final word here where it says the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And the word in Greek doesn't actually say made dwelling. It doesn't mean he set up camp. It meant he tabernacled. He created a temple within us, among us. And in the ancient world, tons of people had temples, right? Everyone had temples. Why did they have temples? It's because everybody knew that there is a problem between me and God. There is a gap between me and the divine. And that gap needs to be breached. It needs to be bridged somehow, right? And so what we need is we need a temple. And they would set up religions, and you get a temple, and you get a priest, right? And they would bridge that gap. There's an old Anglican priest, and he's like nearly 100 years old now. His name is Dick Lucas. He was a priest at St. Helens in London. And Dick had this story trying to describe this. And he said, imagine a Christian having a conversation with a Roman neighbor back 2,000 years ago. And the Roman says, oh, you're a Christian. Awesome. Always wanted to meet one of you people. Tell me, where is your temple? And the Christian would respond, we don't really have temples. We don't really do that. Really? Well, where are your priests that do the sacrifices and stuff? It's just like, yeah, we don't really have that or those. Not really, no. So, what is this religion? And he's just like, yeah, it's not really a religion like that at all. Because this moral pagan is trying to understand, well, how do you do this? How do you bridge the gap? And he says, no, you haven't really understood it. The gap's been bridged. The gap is bridged right there. It's because I know someone. I know the bridge. And it's not a principle. And it's not a sacrifice. And it's not a certain number of sheep and lambs. It's a person. It's Jesus. And by connecting with him and by being his child, both the incoherence of relativism and the moralism are defeated. Or less defeated, they're solved. They found what they were both looking for in the fact that I have found a non-oppressive absolute. Jesus is a non-oppressive absolute. He is an absolute that does not change and will never change, but it's not oppressive because it's not based on my performance. It's based on what he did for me. And so I rest in that absolute. I don't get anxiety in that absolute. I don't look at others as if they're less than me in that absolute. And you might say to me, and you'd be right, but the church has been one of the greatest centers of oppression in all of history. What are you talking about? And I would agree with you. But it's because they didn't get it. It's because so many times people who called themselves Christians did not get it. They were moralists. But if they had found the peace and the grace and the acceptance, and when they did find the peace and the grace and the acceptance, it was Christians that created orphanages. It was Christians who created hospitals. It's Christians who walked into cities full of the plague, and while everyone was running the other way, they were walking in to take care of the sick. That is the kind of people that this world needs today. That is what God is calling us to be. Not to be super cool, awesome people. Not to be people who find the hardest principle ever and try to live up to it, but people who rest in Jesus as his children and follow him as his children. So let's listen, that great cloud of witnesses that have gone before us, calling out, encouraging us to strive on, and we will follow that one true Logos who became flesh. In the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Amen.